Anthony Boldurian, and thank you once again for joining me. My name is Aramil, and today we will be looking at the Clovis tool of Enigma, an archaeological mystery, the Bi-Beveled Bone Rod. Let's do some archaeology. Very briefly, we'll talk about the Clovis people themselves. These are the ancestors of most, if not all, Native Americans, and they are among the first people to ever be on the North American continent. Now, that puts them here around 13,000 years ago, with the exact date being an ongoing debate. Now, the Clovis people are best known for the Clovis Point, which is a large projectile point uh, which was used to great effect and was reproduced surprisingly faithfully for a very long time with very little deviation. Now, while they might be known for this massive point, and you'd want a massive point because this is well before mammoths were extinct, so you want something big to stick into whatever predator or prey there is. But today we won't be talking about the Clovis Point, though that is a topic I plan to cover in the future. Today we will be talking about something that's found often near Clovis points, which is the Bi-Beveled Bone Rod. What is that? We're going to take the name and break it apart bit by bit because, by and large, scientists aren't very creative when coming up with the names of artifacts, and it's often very descriptive. So, Bi-Beveled Bone Rod. Well, we're going to go backwards. Rod, it's a straight piece of something. Cool. Done. Bone, made generally of mammoth bone or ivory. Cool. Bi-Beveled. Slight misnomer here, as it technically can be bi-beveled or unibeveled. Now, what this means is that the ends, or one of the ends, have been kind of filed off, kind of making a trapezoid. And cue the picture. Now, this is an example of a bi-beveled bone rod. A unibeveled would obviously be only beveled on one end. To set down some of the measurements, they are generally 180 to 280 millimeters long, or 7 to 11 inches. They are generally 22 millimeters wide, or about 0.86 inches. And they are about 15 millimeters, or 0.6 inches thick. You'll note that there are hatching, and in this case cross-hatching, marks on both of the beveled edges. So now that we've talked about the general physical characteristics of the bi-beveled bone rods, now we're going to talk about what are the bi-beveled bone rods for. In short, we have no idea. So today we're going to talk about a few of the different hypotheses that have been put forth over the past century or so that seek to, in some way, shape, or form, explain why these things keep popping up and what they were used for. I have a short list of about 6 different hypotheses that have been put forth at various times, and each one has their own reasoning behind it, independently researched for the most part, and have very differing levels of credibility, shall we say. I'll also be putting forth a personal hypothesis that I came up with while doing research. Our first hypothesis, and perhaps the most likely, is also, in fact, one of the oldest, put forth by Cotter in 1937 and later revisited by Lyman et al. In 1998, the idea of using the Bi-Beveled Bone Rods as foreshafts for the Clovis point and the spears that the Clovis people used. Now, this, in effect, would have two Bi-Beveled Bone Rods at the fore of the shaft of a spear. So you would have the spear shaft going on down, whatever, which would come to more or less a point, which would then have two of the Bi-Beveled Bone Rods kind of sandwiched on top of it so that the beveling, in effect, makes two openings. One of these openings would fit snugly over the wooden shaft of the spear, whereas the other one, on the other side of the Bi-Beveled Bone Rods, would then fit in around a Clovis point. And from there, it would be bound up with probably leather cord, I'd assume. Now, this gives the advantage of not weakening the wooden shaft, because if you were to, say, split into the wooden shaft of a spear to inset the piece of flint or chert that is your spear point, this, of course, makes it very easy for the wood to just continue to split on the whole length of the spear. And of course, this is a very bad thing when you want all of the force going into the object that your spear is trying to penetrate, like a mammoth hide that happens to be running at you very fast and very powerfully. So instead of weakening the spear, you have these two pieces of bone instead, which will take all of the stress off of the wooden haft. This hypothesis, put forth first by Garrity in 1956 and later Wilke et al. In 1991, uh, is a bit more nuanced, I guess. Uh, Now, of course, bone is used in flint knapping and as tools for sharpening pieces of flint and chert. The problem is that we already have most of the tools we believe that the Clovis used already accounted for, and the Bi-Beveled Bone Rod doesn't particularly work great at what it is proposed to do in the context of flint knapping. So it's kind of a odd choice overall to use as part of flint knapping. This isn't to say that it wasn't also potentially used. Of course, we would expect to see effectively multi-tools, things that can perform several different functions, as the Clovis were very nomadic hunter-gatherers that ranged very far and wide. So it's not impossible that they also use this for flint knapping. It just seems unlikely. Our third hypothesis, put forth by Saunders and Daeschler in 1994, is a bit of an odd one, especially when you first look at it, especially if you, like myself, have never in fact butchered a mammoth before. But based off of an excavation done, I'm trying to remember all the details. They found certain depressions in a mammoth. I want to say it was somewhere in the foot, on one of the foot bones, that would suggest that people use the bi-bevel bone rods as levers to kind of pick up and hoist, or in some way, shape, or form, shift a mammoth leg while it was being butchered. Now, apparently, uh, doing such does help in the butchering of a mammoth. I haven't had the opportunity or really the desire to butcher a mammoth, or an elephant for that matter, but I'll leave that to the experts. And apparently, it does help. Now, that's a very situational use for a bibevel bone rod, and I can't imagine that was the only reason they would bring a bibevel bone rod along with them. Now, it's entirely possible that, say, someone's spear snapped, while they were taking down this mammoth creature, uh, and they just used it because, well, they're right there, they've got him at hand, and it would make sense, going back to the idea that the Clovis would have, one tool that can do multiple things. It's not impossible that they were used as pry bars or wedges. I just, personally at least, uh, can't imagine that was their sole use. Our fourth hypothesis, put forth by Gramley in 1993, posits that the bibevel bone rods were used as sled shoes for, as the name suggests, toboggan like sleds, and thus used to transport things from place to place. I won't pretend that I subscribe to this hypothesis, and among academic circles, it doesn't seem to have gained much traction, if you'll pardon the pun. So we're going to move along rather quickly to our fifth hypothesis. Hypothesis 5, put forth by Lyman et al. Back in 1998 again, is I wouldn't say it's a competing hypothesis so much as it is a logical continuation of their idea as foreshafts. Hafting wedges, effectively taking the bibevel bone rods, once again, placing two of them together with any number of tools as kind of interchangeable bits. Basically, we're using the bibevel bone rods as a handle. Uh, because, of course, with the Clovis point being the size that it is, you could very easily uh, use it as a knife, dagger, or any sorts of things, and you have a wide variety of other uh, flint knapped tools. Throughout history, we have awls and other, basically drill bits, to pierce anything from hide and leather all the way to wood, bone, shell, and I believe stone too. So, having the ability to make handles really helps. So, I would put this as almost a subset of our first hypothesis, and I also would probably say that this is amongst the most likely, as opposed to our last official hypothesis, number 6. Our sixth hypothesis, put forth by Bradley in 1995, is included here basically for humor and to showcase the great lengths that archaeologists will and are even prone to going to explain anything unknown as ceremonial. The hypothesis revolves around the idea that you would take the bi-beveled bone rods and you would place them end to end so that the beveled ends overlap, uh, and these ends get somehow affixed together. And then you take the unibeveled ends and you would place them as kind of cap pieces. Uh, so they would just sit on the end and thus uh, not continue on. Uh, and these would together form a kind of shaman staff or other ritualistically inclined piece of equipment. I will remind you all that these are what, like under an inch in diameter and less than a foot long. You're going to need a bunch of them first and foremost. It's going to be very wobbly unless they are very, very well attached to one another. And honestly, there are just so many easier ways to make a staff than to make it out of short pieces of bone. I mean, they are making these from mammoth. I'm not a biologist, I'll admit, but I have to assume that there are some longer bones in a mammoth's body that could be used to better effect. So, I'm sorry, Bradley, but I'm going to have to disagree. I don't buy it. But that's number 6. The final hypothesis that I will be positing to you today is actually one that I came up with while doing research for this video, as I mentioned earlier. And this is kind of a rough idea that's kind of still percolating in my mind. But the idea kind of jives, if you will, with the idea that Lyman also had. Now, what if you take the wooden shaft of a spear, you then affix the two pieces of bi-beveled bone rod up at the top, uh, but you don't add in a spear point. Instead, you just have these two pieces of reasonably sharp bone sticking up. It actually resembles a fishing spear in a lot of ways. I'm not going to say that this is the only reason why they would have bi-beveled bone rods. Obviously, we found bi-beveled bone rods in caches pretty far away from water. But I feel like it is entirely possible that they were used to aid in fishing. Uh, Kind of a two-pronged trident. What would be a trident then? Dudent? Is that a word? Either way, the idea remains, and if I ever get any funding, or if perhaps a wealthier experimental archaeologist than I picks up this idea, I'd love to see if it would actually work well. If you could theoretically use this for spearfishing. I've seen similar designs, so I don't see why it couldn't potentially work. So it's an idea that I'm willing to just throw out there onto the table and let you, the viewers, decide whether or not that holds water. So there we have it, a quick video on the Bi-Beveled Bone Rods of the Clovis Native Americans. Now, of course, we don't have any firm evidence as to what these were used for, so leave me a comment down below on what you think is most likely. Do you agree with my assessment that Lyman probably has it right? Uh, do you think that they were more likely flaking tools? Hey, if you think that Bradley has it right and that these were obviously ceremonial, let me know in the comments section. Until next time, my friends, thank you for watching. Anthony Boldurian, and farewell.